My golden brother didn't let me have a peaceful childhood, and after I left home and got married, he even hired someone to set me up in a trap and sue me because he had feelings for my wife. Hi Reddit. I'm using a throwaway account as I need some advice on this complicated situation I'm in. Please forgive any mistakes, I just need to get this out of my system. A little about me. I'm a 43-year-old man, the younger of 2 siblings. I'll try to give you the whole story in chronological order to give a full picture. My brother Michael, who's 45, has always been our parents' golden child. Growing up, he could do no wrong in their eyes. When he got bad grades, they would cheer him up and help him improve. On the other hand, if I got decent grades, it was always met with disappointment. For example, when Michael graduated high school, he got a new car and a big party. In contrast, I got $300 and a pat on the back. Now, don't get me wrong. Michael wasn't a bad brother. We mostly kept to ourselves and did our own thing. I never complained much, but I always had this feeling that I needed to get out of the house and explore life on my own terms. So I left to go to university in another city, and after 7 years I earned my MBA. After graduation, I returned to my hometown for work, though I had little contact with my family apart from birthdays and holidays. Michael, who wasn't the most academically gifted, barely made it out of high school. He dropped out of college, and our parents helped him open a small hardware store. While I was happy for him, I was focused on my own life. It was around this time I started dating Emily, who was 20 then. We had met at college and were both from the same city. Once we moved back home, we settled into our own place, found jobs, and started building a life together. In 2008, during the holidays, I introduced Emily to my family. They were surprisingly warm and welcoming, which made me feel more loved than I had in a long time. I did notice Michael staring at Emily quite a bit during the gathering, but I brushed it off. Soon after, though, his visits to our apartment increased, from once every few months to nearly daily. It became intrusive, especially since he would show up in the evenings when Emily and I were trying to unwind after work. Eventually, I had to draw the line, which led to a big argument with my parents. Michael apologized and cut his visits back to once every other month on weekends, which was a more reasonable arrangement. In 2011, I proposed to Emily, and when we announced the engagement to the family, my parents were thrilled. Michael, however, simply shook my hand and left the small party I'd thrown. After that, he disappeared for a couple of weeks. In 2013, Emily and I got married, and Michael brought a +1 to the wedding, a woman named Laura. 11 months later, in 2014, they got married. My marriage to Emily was going well, and we had our first daughter Olivia in 2015 and our second Chloe in 2017. But in 2016, Laura messaged me, telling me that Michael was obsessed with Emily and that this was the main reason for their separation. I apologized to her and wished her the best. I also spoke to Emily about it and asked her if she had noticed anything odd about Laura. Emily mentioned that Laura had always seemed a bit cold and distant toward her. I decided to confront Michael in front of the whole family. I asked him why he was ruining his life over his obsession with my wife. He seemed completely blindsided by the question and denied everything. A huge argument followed, and I ended up telling Michael that he was no longer welcome in my house. Both my parents and Emily talked to me afterward and convinced me that despite everything, he was still family. For the sake of keeping the peace, I decided to let it go, and life carried on. Fast forward to 2018, and I can still remember that day vividly. It was July 25th. I had been running several errands while my wife took our daughters to see their grandparents. Shortly after lunch, I received a call from my father, his voice full of anger, ordering me to come to their house. When I arrived, I could feel the tension in the air immediately. Emily was a crying mess, and my parents and some extended family members were trying to console her. When I asked what had happened, I was accused of committing sexual assault. I was completely shocked and confused. They claimed that at a party 2 weeks earlier, I had assaulted a girl and later texted her not to say anything, or else there would be consequences. The girl in question, Amanda, was someone I had known from high school. She was part of a larger friend group that I occasionally hung out with. According to her, after the party, which had taken place at a club, I had followed her to her car and assaulted her. She provided screenshots of supposed conversations where I had messaged her afterward, warning her not to tell anyone. My father slapped me in the face, and my parents told me they never wanted to see me again. Emily, full of anger, said that we were done. I tried to defend myself, but nobody believed me. I was thrown out of the house and told that neither Emily nor the kids would be coming back to our apartment. My father came over later to pack their things and take them away. That evening, Michael shared the screenshots and all the details in our extended family's WhatsApp group. I was unanimously kicked out. Over the next few days, even some of my friends called to say they were disgusted with me and never wanted to speak to me again. I was devastated. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and struggled to function at work. My boss had heard the rumors, but couldn't do much until legal action was taken. He advised me to resign to keep my record clean, explaining that if the police showed up, I'd be terminated anyway. Reluctantly, I agreed and left the company. In mid-August, while still wallowing in my misery, I received 2 documents from the court. One was a letter of disownment from my parents, and the other was divorce papers from Emily. Drunk and desperate, I went to my parents' house, only for Michael to beat me up, calling me a disgrace to the family. I was left bloodied and barely able to stand, while my parents and Emily watched from afar, doing nothing. I stumbled home, crying, and realized I had lost everyone and everything. During the divorce process, I was jobless, and my parents agreed to cover the costs for the children, so I didn't have to pay child support or alimony. By January 2019, I was officially divorced, but picking up the pieces of my life was tough. I considered confronting Amanda, but ultimately decided against it, knowing that the women-centric laws in our country could land me in prison for 5 or 6 years if I made a wrong move. In February, I got into a serious accident, spending 5 weeks in recovery. The hospital staff tried to contact Emily as she was still listed as my emergency contact, but she hung up and no one came to visit me. After recovering, I realized my savings were dwindling and I needed to get back on my feet. I sold all my furniture, paid off my remaining rent, and moved to a different city 2 hours away to start over. Finding a job was difficult, and I began drinking heavily. Suicidal thoughts plagued me, and waking up in cold sweats from nightmares became routine. After 4 months of this, I ran into an old acquaintance from college, David. We hadn't spoken much back in the day, but he recognized me and called me over. We caught up on life, and when I told him I was looking for a job, he mentioned that he was starting a management consulting firm and invited me to join. After catching up over a few drinks, David mentioned that he needed someone with my skills to help him with his new consulting firm. I was eager to work, partly to get my mind off my personal troubles, so I agreed to the offer. However, I told him I wanted to meet his team before making a final decision. A couple of days later, he introduced me to Mark, another guy who would be working with us. David explained that for now it would just be the 3 of us. I shook hands with Mark, and before moving forward, I decided to come clean about my past. I told them everything, how I had been disowned by my family, divorced, and how the situation unfolded. I couldn't help but tear up as I shared my story. David and Mark listened sympathetically. They assured me that as long as there were no legal issues or criminal charges on my record, it wouldn't affect our partnership. I told them the police had never come to my house, and they were relieved. David did mention, however, that he wanted to run a background check just to be safe, and I completely understood. I was living in a rundown apartment at the time to minimize expenses, and while waiting for the results of the background check, I kept looking for jobs elsewhere in case things didn't work out. After about 2 weeks, David called me and confirmed that my record was clean. He welcomed me to the team and I dove into work. Around the same time, David encouraged me to start therapy, and I began attending regular sessions. I also joined a gym, and, with David's encouragement, I began channeling my frustrations into exercise. I went from an average weight of 77 kilos to over 105 kilos. David and I became gym buddies, and I started seeing him as an older brother, the role Michael should have played. By the end of 2019, I had regained a lot of control over my life. The consulting firm took off, and I began earning a decent amount of money. I rented a nice apartment in a good neighborhood, and while some of my emotional wounds still lingered, I started to feel like I could move on. One of the steps I took was to officially change my last name to David's, with his blessing and that of his parents, who had become like family to me. They even included me in family events, and David made me his best man at his wedding as a way of expressing their acceptance of me. In 2020, I started dating again, but my emotional baggage often got in the way. Whenever I told women about my past, they would disappear, and I couldn't blame them. However, one day I met Kim, a 29-year-old half-Korean, half-Italian woman who worked at a coffee shop I frequented. Initially, we only interacted when I placed an order, but one day, while I was with David, he noticed that she kept looking over at me. He encouraged me to ask her out, so I worked up the courage and invited her for drinks. To my surprise, she agreed, and we had a lovely first date. However, I dreaded the inevitable moment when I'd have to tell her about my past. On our second date over lunch, I told her everything. I didn't want to mislead her, so I laid it all out, the accusations, my divorce, and my emotional struggles. Kim was blindsided by the revelation, but listened quietly. I told her that I wasn't expecting her to continue seeing me, but I wanted to give her the chance to make an informed choice. A few days later, she called me and said she wanted to meet. We sat down at the coffee shop where she worked, and she told me that she trusted me and was willing to give our relationship a shot. I was shocked. I had never expected anyone to accept me after everything I'd been through. I even shed a few tears because, for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. Kim and I went on several more dates, and our connection deepened. For the first time in years, I started to feel like I was healing. In early 2020, we took a vacation to Europe, my first trip in years, and had an amazing time. When the pandemic hit in 2021, we stayed in touch through FaceTime and phone calls. Once things started to return to normal, Kim lost her job at the coffee shop. She was an excellent cook, and I suggested she start a cloud kitchen business. With financial support from her parents, she set up the business by mid-2022, and it quickly became successful. Although my life was improving, I still struggled with emotional scars. While I no longer had suicidal thoughts, I occasionally experienced nightmares. In February 2024, Kim announced that she was pregnant, and I was flooded with a mix of emotions: joy, fear, and sorrow for what I had lost in my previous life. Kim comforted me, and we fell asleep in each other's arms. I proposed to her soon after, and she was overjoyed. For the first time in years, I felt like I was close to finding peace. As our wedding preparations were in full swing for mid-June, I received a phone call from an unknown number in late May. When I answered, I heard someone crying. It was Amanda. I recognized her voice instantly and hung up, trying to control my anger. Kim saw the expression on my face and came over concerned. When the phone rang again, she picked it up and put it on speaker. A man's voice explained that he was Amanda's fiancé and that she wanted to confess something about what had happened years ago. Amanda got on the line and apologized repeatedly, crying the entire time. Kim did most of the talking because I had broken down into tears. Kim said they could call back later, and after the conversation ended, she immediately called David for advice. David came over and listened patiently as Kim explained everything that had happened. He gave me a hug and suggested that we meet Amanda with a lawyer present to get a proper confession on record. I called my lawyer, who agreed to set up a meeting at his office. 3 days later, Amanda, her fiancé, and I met with my lawyer and Kim. Amanda looked half dead, her expressions were hollow, and she seemed like a broken person. My lawyer recorded the entire meeting, and I asked him to mediate. Amanda explained in detail what had happened back then. In essence, she and my brother had been dating in 2016, and no one knew. He was the mastermind behind the plot to frame me, and she went along with it because she loved him and would do anything for him. He had stolen my WhatsApp profile picture and used it to create fake screenshots by chatting back and forth with Amanda. Hearing this, I went from crying to feeling pure rage. If it weren't for Kim being by my side, I might have assaulted Amanda right there. Kim was furious as well, partly due to her pregnancy, and she lashed out at Amanda, verbally tearing her apart. My lawyer tried to maintain civility, but it was clear that Kim was enraged. Amanda's fiancé explained that she had confessed everything to him recently, after a night of heavy drinking. He had been pushing her to come clean, and finally, She agreed to face the consequences of her actions. Amanda added that Michael had become cold and distant toward her after the plan succeeded, eventually breaking up with her 6 months later. She had spent the years since then in therapy, too scared to come forward. After hearing everything, my lawyer suggested we take a break. When we reconvened, he told me I had more than enough evidence to sue Amanda and my brother for defamation. However, I decided to wait until after the wedding to take any legal action. I didn't want to let this situation ruin my special day. Amanda's fiancé apologized, and I told Amanda that I would be in contact with her later. The wedding was small and intimate, with both David and Mark serving as best men. Afterward, Kim and I took a 3-week honeymoon across Europe, which was an amazing time for both of us. While the nightmares returned during the trip, Kim was always there to comfort me. When we got back, I spoke with my therapist, who suggested that I would eventually need to confront my ex-family for closure. This is the end of story. Share your thoughts in comment section. Do like, share the video, subscribe the channel.